Hello everybody and welcome back to another Wuthering Waves video. Let's get into it. Now, unfortunately, I've been knee-deep in Honkai Star Rail for the past few days, and so I've been a little bit distracted. But now that the Wuthering Waves closed beta test has been out for a few days, we're seeing more first impressions come out from content creators who are having, actually in some cases, their first exposure to the game as a whole. And I think overall the reception has been fairly positive, but I wanted to take a closer look at one of the ones I found here. I found this video from a YouTube channel called MMOByte, where I've seen some content from this guy before. He's got another YouTube channel called Sticks, where he seems to have a fairly well-educated position on gacha games, MMO games, and kind of games in general. Now, I caught a few little clips of this video, and I thought it would be a great video to go into together and take a look at what he's saying about Wuthering Waves and see if I agree or not. But before we jump into the content, make sure to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, guys. It helps the channel grow, and I really appreciate that. On to the content. So as I said before, guys, this is I Played Wuthering Waves Day 1 Impressions. Let's jump into it.
So I just got done streaming Wuthering Waves. I think I've
so
streamed
jealous.
it for
Still
approximately...
jealous.
All work and no idle makes Tauchi a dull girl.
That was so
Thank
cute.
you, Tauchi.
Should you keep yourself bustling?
Yes, thank you for your wise input, Tauchi. Now, I think I've streamed a grand total of 8 or 9 hours.
I'm just thinking of that like YouTube video life where you're like just trying to record your thoughts for this and just being interrupted like that. I don't know. I just think it's so funny.
Of Wuthering Waves so far, and I have been having an exceptional amount of fun in game. Now,
There you go.
I will note here, this game definitely isn't for everyone. There are a lot of aspects that people might find similar to Genshin Impact or Tower Fantasy. There are a lot of areas of the game that are still very heavily incomplete. And that is, after all, because this is a beta test. You cannot solely judge a game based off of a beta test. This game has the potential to be in active beta testing for a multitude of years to come.
Now, I think that's a fair take, but I do have one small caveat I want to add on to that. Not a problem, a caveat. While yes, it's a closed beta test, so this is not indicative of the final product, it is indicative of the direction that they're going though. So I think it is still very important that the community gives feedback and real constructive feedback on the things in the game that they think should be changed. Like, for example, I did raise some concerns in my previous Wuthering Waves video where I was talking about the gacha system and how I really don't want them to copy Genshin's. I've heard some other feedback since then where people are saying, oh, well, no, they're just copying it for this. This is not going to be the final gacha. Maybe, but I haven't heard anything about that. So I think it is still important that if you have concerns about the game, we should vocalize that. Not harp on the company. Let me be clear. That's not an excuse to absolutely crap on something. That is not what I'm saying whatsoever, because I am saying it should come from a place of wanting the game to succeed. And to get the game to succeed, we should be advocating for things that are constructive for the game. I also just wanted to add that in there too.
I will preface this real quick by stating that I've been streaming a lot, so I might go off on a tirade or I might rant a little bit at times. I have not taken the time here to collect all of my thoughts and condense this, but I will try and summarize and keep this as short as possible. Before we go any further, I just want to be generous here to thank all of our incredible patrons. You guys allow me to continue to play games like this.
I'm going to leave this in, you know, reacting to the content. So shout out to those patrons for supporting MMOByte.
And for reference, I plan on continuing to stream this every single day this week, along with Honkai Star Rail. So shameless plug, come watch me over on Twitch. I will state, the combat so far is phenomenal. But I'm talking about this game for the entire rest of the video. It will be referencing it as a gacha game exclusively.
Okay.
I'm not comparing this to console exclusive games, nor am I comparing this to non-gacha games. So keep that in mind. Don't misconstrue what I'm saying here, please.
I think that's totally fair. Gacha games really are kind of their own niche as, you know, games that really take on that free-to-play model and find other ways to monetize within it. It's really not fair to compare it to something like he said, to like a God of War that's like a one-time purchase for a complete game experience. These are what you would also call a live service game where the game is continuing to expand as you're continuing to play. So I do think that's a fair caveat, but I do think it's fair to still, like he said, compare it to other gacha games. But I would also just go a step further and say, like, not all gacha games are created equal in terms of, like, there's so many styles of gacha game. Like, there's like idle games, there's like turn-based RPG like Honkai Star Rail, then there's action RPG like there is with Wuthering Waves. So even within gacha, they're not all the exact same. However, I would argue that when you're talking about competing for your time and what's worth playing, 100% all gachas are equal in that way, and you got to decide, you know, which you will have the most fun with.
Ethically, this game, I know there are some people out there that think this game is too muted, that the game is too bland, is very
I did make comments
saturated.
on that myself.
I've heard countless people wish that this game was bright, that this game was vibrant, like Genshin Impact, like Tower Fantasy. But at the same time, I also hear people saying they don't want another Genshin Impact clone. When Tower Fantasy launched, there were countless people that said, this looks like a cheap Genshin Impact rip. So if they went for this bright, vibrant environment, people would have just made the claim that it is a cheap Genshin clone. So they opted to go for something more unique to their brand. Punishing Gray Raven is a much more saturated, much more muted
that
game,
is true.
and they are the same developers. So they opted to go for their own unique aesthetic and graphical style, and people are complaining that they're not choosing to be what Genshin is. I cannot wrap my head around this, but I guess at the end of the day, all I can say is they just, you cannot please everyone.
Look, that's true. 100% you can't please everybody. So I definitely would agree with that overall. The only thing that I kind of disagree with this is we're talking about personal preference here. Like, I don't think anybody's asking Wuthering Waves to be a Genshin clone, but I also don't think it's unfair that when somebody's looking stylistically at a game or a genre of games, if they want a certain aesthetic along with that, like, again, playing Honkai Star Rail recently, the game is gorgeous. Like, I've said this time and time again, Hoyoverse's game design has always been on point. The quality of their characters, animations, audio, and kind of story, you know, hit or miss there, but overall has always been like top tier, especially when you're considering free-to-play games. So like I understand that, but I also understand there is that problem, like he said, that like if you copy it too much, people are going to say it's a Genshin clone. I mean, that's already happened regardless, just being an open world anime exploration game that has got squad-based combat in it. And so I mean, like, those comparisons are always going to be made, and they always will be made. But I understand that you can't win, especially when you consider Genshin's fan base. You will never win. So I also understand not trying to take that on, and you just focus on doing you. And again, I think that's still fine. I think Kuro should still do that because, like he said too, it does fit more with their brand anyway. It fits more with Punishing Gray Raven, and they should just continue to do that. I respect that. I think it's still a little too washed out. Like, even taking a more muted, saturated approach, I understand. It's still just a bit too much even for me, but that's probably never going to change. I'll just have to play with like an NVIDIA filter or something. It's fine.
If they look like Genshin, they're a Genshin clone. If they don't look like Genshin, well, they should. Now, the narrative admittedly,
Sure.
Kudo Games with Punishing Gray Raven, the narrative for Punishing Gray Raven is actually really good for a gacha game. For Wuthering Waves so far, I will admit currently there is no voice acting present, which means to me, I feel less engaged with what's going on. And if I'm less engaged with what's going on, I tend to skip story.
100%.
So I've been skipping a bunch of it because I feel like when they fully implement voice acting into the game, I'll be paying a lot more attention to it because it'll keep my attention better. I feel more connected to the characters and the world and the story overall. So I can't really speak about the narrative. I found it to be mediocre at best. There are certain aspects of it that I feel like are okay. The intro actually did seem pretty good. The cutscenes, by the way, fantastic. The movement, the amount of cutscenes in the game, the fluidity of everything that is going on in the cutscenes, fantastic. I feel like they excel at cutscenes. I know it's a weird thing to say, and it's a weird thing to compliment, but for those of you that play World of Warcraft, you'll know what I mean when I say that towards the end of Dragonflight, or towards the end of Shadowlands and Dragonflight, the cutscenes have gotten so much better than pre-Shadowlands. So there's just something I don't know. I feel like there's just something innate.
I definitely see what he's saying on skipping the story. And look, honestly, I probably would have ended up skipping a lot too if it was not voice acted. I didn't know that the story was not voice acted in the CBT. So I don't think there's any issue in skipping that story. Also, because if you didn't skip it in the closed beta test, you probably were going to end up skipping it on the full release. One side's going to get skipped regardless when you're playing the beta versus the final game. So I don't think that's an issue that he did skip all that. I would probably be in a very similar position. I also think what he's talking about, the animations, though, is really important. He's talking about a comparison to World of Warcraft right now. But like, again, if we're comparing gachas to gachas, even comparing Wuthering Waves to Punishing Gray Raven, I am personally not engaged by the light novel style of storytelling. And that's very heavy in Punishing Gray Raven. And, you know, when I do stream Punishing Gray Raven, I typically don't end up reading all of the story because from streaming content, it's not super engaging. So if I'm doing it in my own personal time and playing, I will. But I sometimes have to push through it and force myself to do it. When you get those animated scenes, or even when it's just voice acted, again, in something like Genshin or Honkai Star Rail, where like you are still kind of clicking through the conversation, when it is narrated, there's still at least some degree of dynamic movement. It's something that keeps you engaged, that like it matters. When you're talking about retention, when you're talking about your experience, you want to have fun. And if you're not having fun, then what's the point of playing? So I think those are totally fair takes on that.
Innately enjoyable about cutscenes that are fluid in terms of movement, in terms of facial expression. And this is something that admittedly Tower of Fantasy did really poorly. The cutscenes looked hella janky and stiff. And don't get me started about the expression on their faces.
On that note, actually, like that was a huge problem for me actually in Genshin's story in general. The lip sync was non-existent. It was clearly an English dub, or even if you did like the Japanese, it was a Japanese dub. Nothing was timed to the other languages in Genshin Impact. And you'd have like really awkward timings sometimes. And it was just like a weird experience. Honkai Star Rail fixed this. I don't know how. Maybe it has something to do with like some of the NVIDIA like lip syncing technology that they've developed. But if you change the language of the game, the lip sync in the game also adjusts. And like, that's so cool. I love seeing that kind of tech. So no matter what language you speak, you're still going to get like an optimal, like cinematic or narrative experience in that way. And so I would love to see if like Kuro can implement that too on the final release of the game. Obviously not expecting that for a closed beta test, but on the final release, it's just little polishes like that elevated game's quality.
The world at present, it does share a lot of similarities to Genshin. You have like the equivalent of Sealies out in the world that you follow, but in Wuthering Waves they're butterflies. So you follow them and lead you to a chest. You have little encounters that you do to unlock treasure chests. You have little like golden cubes that you can collect to turn in. You have the equivalent of an adventure rank in the form of a coral rank. There are a lot of similarities to Genshin. Now, that isn't to say that they ripped it from Genshin, because it's to say that Genshin ripped a lot of their stuff from Breath of the Wild when they just kind of took inspiration from it. Punishing Gray Raven had a lot of things that Wuthering Waves has as well, but there's no denying they did definitely take certain things from Genshin and kind of adapt it in their own way and implement it into this game. The world
open world game puzzles are not something unique to Genshin. That is something, like you said before, it's existed in Breath of the Wild, it's existed in other games as well. And I would also argue that sometimes if something ain't broke, don't fix it. Like if there's some parts of the formula that work and people enjoy the experience to help fill the world, I don't see an issue in keeping those things in. As long as, again, they're adapted in their own unique way and it is not a literal one-to-one, the exact same thing, I don't see an issue with like at least taking a similar framework for that, like so many other open world games have.
Has been so far very fun to play, or very fun to explore, very fun to play through, especially the wall running. Like being able to run out walls is so much more enjoyable.
I'm so excited to try that. I want to try that so bad.
I don't know why climbing is such a prevalent feature in games. I feel like wall running is it is so much faster and actually looks cooler. Combat in this game is incredibly well done, but what do you expect from the people that made Punishing Gray Raven, right? Boss fights that I've done, the open world boss fights that I've done have been really difficult because my actual character level is like 14 or 16.
Yeah, I've watched some gameplay of that fight.
Like
it
25
looks so
or going
good.
against level 35 to 40 monsters, and those are just absolutely incredibly difficult with the minimal enhancements and upgrades that I've actually made use of currently. And
that's one of the biggest differences between the two games that I think is so important for people to understand, that if you were a hardcore Genshin player, if you were grinding artifacts all the time in Genshin, you were getting all of your skills to level 10, you were doing everything you could because you were trying to like maximize damage and go super hardcore with it, and you weren't getting the payoff in Genshin in the same way that I think you will for this. Again, comparing to like what other people have talked about, what Punishing Gray Raven has brought with the sweaty gameplay that they offer. So I think that's that's something that people like, we should continue to emphasize that for people, that like, it's good to for casuals. It'll be good for the open world exploration and the enjoyment, but that hardcore combat experience is also there. So the time spent, the money spent, it can be much more worthwhile.
There are still plenty of bugs present in game, although admittedly not nearly as many as I thought there were going to be. There are only, I think, about like 12 characters that are present in game so far. I look forward to seeing a larger variety of them.
I feel like 12 characters for the beta test is pretty solid, though. That feels like a lot of characters to me. I think, I don't know the exact number that Punishing Gray Raven had on launch, but I don't think it was like super far off, because like after launch, like, you know, at least with Punishing Gray Raven, they were like dropping new characters every patch, and some of them being free in some cases too. So I don't currently have any concerns about 12. I'm sure we'll get more for the final release on that time, because there's also probably going to be like an initial, you know, 5-star banner or whoever gets to be on that. But I think we'll end up seeing more, but I also don't see 12 as an issue in beta.
Co-op unlocked at level 30. Mrs. Sticks and I, my wife and I, are currently
30.
Level
That's
16
pretty
and
high.
working towards unlocking co-op to hopefully get to play through it before the beta test ends, because we don't know when the beta is ending.
Seems like
I personally
a high
think,
level.
I know some people, again, don't like the muted, saturated world, but I think it kind of fits that post-apocalyptic feel. And Punishing Gray Raven is kind of the same way, and they're sticking to this very specific aesthetic and theme. And again, it doesn't need to be another Genshin Impact. We don't need another Genshin Impact. We have a Genshin Impact. And that world is evidently not going to appeal to everyone, and that is perfectly fine. Because at the end of the day, I'm having fun with the game, and I think it looks pretty good. And for a beta test, this definitely far exceeded my expectations. I expected it to be a buggy mess with no content, very few characters, very little to do. And on the contrary, it turned out to be very different. There's a lot to do, plenty of characters to play as, set in a very appealing world to me. Anyway, subjectively.
Look, and that's fine for it to be subjective. Art is subjective. Style is subjective. So like, I don't think there's any problems with that and taking that take on it. That's why I also don't think there's an issue with anybody saying that they want it to be more vibrant. Like, look, they can want it to be more vibrant all they want. Like, that's just the style that they like more. I will say overall, that was like, it's a good video. You know, he was a little more off the cuff with that. So I'm not going to be like super hard on some of the points where I think he could have had a little more nuance to it. Like, again, overall, I don't see any major red flags of anything that's coming out of the beta so far, even with, you know, some of the less than kind things that Styx had to say about this, or MMOByte. I think they were totally fair takes. And I'm really excited to see what comes in the future. There's, again, rumor of another closed beta test coming later this fall, maybe towards the end of this year, and maybe we'll see some of those improvements that people are looking for. Maybe we'll see some of the voice acted story, who knows? But that's gonna be it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'm gonna leave a link to the video in the description down below. Make sure to go and like and subscribe to MMOByte if you haven't already. Appreciate reacting to his content there. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and we'll see you next time.